YouTube? Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video, Mr. Terry. Today we are going to be watching a video from the channel Feature History. And they did a video on the Soviet-Afghan War. And I picked this one specifically because it connected with the last video that we covered here, which was the live reaction video on the collapse of the Soviet Union. And one of the things that was talked about in there was the effect the Soviet-Afghan War had on the Soviet Union, and one of the things that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union, because this ends up being a pretty big failure for them. And wanted to look into that more from my perspective and just to learn more for me, and then for you too. So that's awesome. Let's get started. Now, original video link is down below. Go ahead and click that. Make sure you give that the full view time. You can even do that right now while you're watching mine or whatever, just so they can get that view time that they definitely deserve. All right. With that, let's go ahead and begin. So, Soviet-Afghan War by Feature History.
It's time we stop Stalin and mark this topic off the list, and if you were hoping for something else, well, Soviet. Oh, God.
Love it. Great jokes. It's so great. You make the Stalin jokes and the Marx, and it's great. It's great. Never get enough of that, right? I like their artwork. I can't remember if I've reacted to one of their videos before.
Hello and welcome to Feature History, brought to you by the Great Courses Plus, more on that later, and featuring the Soviet-Afghan War, a war where the battles were won and the war was lost. How does that happen? Well, let's find out.
We're going to war.
We must understand what Afghanistan
Helmets
is.
on.
It's a landlocked country that sits in a harsh, almost inhospitable area between the traditional crossroads of great powers.
That's always been Afghan history forever. Way before this has always been one of being torn between empires. You got like Persia in the west, then you got India to the east of them, and then in the modern era you got the British, who are basically taking over India, and then you had the Russian Empire coming from the south. It's just like sandwiched between a lot of vastly differing empires and nations.
Forces from India, the Far East, the Middle East, and the West have all attempted to pass and fallen before Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires. Initially inhabited by many mixed tribal groups, its people survived in the many valleys of the region, completely isolated from the outside world. The politics and diplomacy of it simply irrelevant to them. In the 19th century, the region was of interest to the large Russian and larger British empires, who had swooped across Asia taking as much land as they could, constantly cautious of one another. Afghanistan's borders were rather incidentally carved as a buffer between the two empires, leading to many arbitrary mixing and splitting of ethnic groups. The British would take many tours into Afghanistan to seize its pivotal central position on the map. However, by
By the way, the one reason why the British are very interested in that is so they can get poppy, so they can make opium, which they can sell to China. That region all up here of like northwestern India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, is where a lot of that came from, the British. So the British had a big reason to do that. I don't know if they'll get into one of the older contexts, which was this event, I guess you would call it in a way. It was called the Great Game, which was basically like the Russian Empire up north, and then the British Empire, and Afghanistan basically being like this competitive battleground for imperial domination, called the Great Game. Might want to look into that too.
19, after only managing to slowly chip away at its frontier, Afghanistan would be affirmed as an independent emirate, and slightly later, kingdom. Under their king, Mohammed Zahir Shah, the country was rapidly pushed into modernizing in the 1960s. The urban folk of the few cities and highways rejoiced the establishment of elections, political rights, and women's education. At the same time, the Cold War had entered into full swing. Afghanistan, once again, the interest of two rivaling powers.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, Afghanistan was kind of westernizing, and it was being propped up by the West. I mean, remember in the Cold, like they're about to explain here, but in the Cold War, basically the United States and the Soviet Union wanted everybody in the world to pick a side. Pick a side. It's our way, their way. Obviously, if it's their way, you're part of the spawn of Satan, which is essentially what they thought of each other. So yeah.
The US and the USSR, who both sought to gain favour in the country. All would not remain well though, as the king's cousin, Muhammad DAOUD Khan, feeling the pleas of the Pashtun people, long ago split by the Pakistani border, had gone ignored far too long, staged a bloodless coup against his cousin. soon declaring himself both president and prime minister of the new Afghan Republic in...
What you're going to get in some of these groups too, Iran had the same thing going on, was your cultural conservatives were not very happy with a lot of this modernization because they took modernization as westernization, and westernization undermining their culture, especially Islamic culture. So if you saw some of those kind of like more fundamentalist types or just more cultural conservatives, were often on the side that was against some of this modernization, or were trying to side with those that would help preserve that more than their fear of it trying to be eradicated.
1973. DAOUD Khan continued to push for progressive policies. However, other ethnic groups did not appreciate his Pashtun nationalism. His response? Crack down and restrict civil liberties. Both the left-wing and traditionalist groups despised him, and this would culminate in a revolution in April of 1978, ousting DAOUD Khan for the Communist People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, that of course had full Soviet support.
And as you can imagine, the Americans are like, no, this is not cool. There's containment policy in America, which kind of started after World War II, which was, all right, accept the fact that communism exists where it does. It exists in China, it exists in the Soviet Union and a handful of other places, and that's okay. It exists where it is, but if it's going to threaten anywhere else, then America will get involved, either directly or indirectly. That's why you see the United States get involved in places like the Korean War or in Vietnam, which had potential communist outcomes. So if you see something like this happening, especially this late in sort of the Cold War in a way, then yeah, the Americans are going to take notice of that.
The PDPA's Prime Minister, HAFIZULLAH Amin, radically pushed the envelope of progress, more women's rights, more equality, more socialism. These top-down changes were very invasive on the self-sufficient rural people, who now being bombarded with tax and land reform and threats to their traditional power structures, were very displeased.
Well, yeah, they were probably very much used to being left alone by the urban part of the nation, right? You could see in, and this isn't just unique to Afghanistan, but you see the difference of the worlds between the rural areas and the urban areas, meaning the people that live in the cities and the people who live outside. The people who live outside are not the ones that are prone to change and change the least amount. And their cultural traditions are far more ingrained and usually want to be preserved. So you see that urban versus rural fight there. So you see the urban part that's looking again for more of these other more socialist changes and then also socially progressive changes. That's going to be at odds. And you see this in lots of parts of the world, and not just in the Cold War. I'm talking about the history of humanity. Urban life versus rural life has always been at odds because they are very different ways of life.
Amin, even worse than his predecessor, responded to dissent with imprisonment and execution, only leading to riots in March of 1979. His president, Nur Mohammad Taraki, was forced to turn to the Soviets for aid in combating both the rioters and, secretly, the radical Amin. When Amin caught wind that Taraki sought to disempower him, he had Taraki killed and took on the vacant presidency for himself.
What do? You have people killed.
For weakening the government's stability and resolve against the rebels. General Secretary of the Soviet Union, Leonid Brezhnev, decided the USSR must take control of the situation themselves, remove the uncontrollable Amin, and pacify the anarchy. Brezhnev was anxious at the...
Pacify it. You know what that means, right? Kill them, and then there'll be peace. Don't use peace to create peace, right? That doesn't happen.
The Iranian Revolution that had seen that country turn
I'm glad they brought
Islamic
this in.
could spread to Afghanistan and further the Muslim areas under Soviet control.
So, Iranian Revolution, just super in a nutshell. Similar thing happened in Afghanistan. You had this modernization and almost westernization happening. The governments in Iran were getting close, a lot of it because of the oil, were getting close to Westerners and Western nations again, like America. And people were, and also some cultural things being adopted in these cities, places like Tehran, which started to look and feel like a Western city, and cultural conservatives didn't like that very much and felt that their country was basically being sold out. So using kind of the unity that Islam brought to, because Islam had always been seen as something uniquely non-Western, and it was a unifying force. So under that banner, kind of raising up to get rid of more of the secular government and try to install a more religiously founded government, which is what happened with the Iranian Revolution. You can see those ideas, and that started in the late 70s, were spreading into the other neighboring regions, right? Islamic regions that were being threatened by outside forces. They also saw it as imperialism, attempts at imperialism here. It didn't matter if you were Soviet Union or the United States. You saw it as non-Islamically founded. I mean, you kind of saw them as kind of a similar foe.
Control, meaning utter collapse of rule there. This could not and would not happen. Now, briefly to interrupt myself, I'm sure you won't mind, we've learned about the Soviet stance on the Middle East. How about the US's stance? It just so happens the Great Courses Plus has a course on that. The Great Courses Plus is a subscription on-demand video learning service with a huge library of over 7,000 quality lectures about anything that might catch your fancy. Personally, I've been watching US and the Middle East, which is a very interesting course taught by Professor Salim Yaqub. You can start a free 1-month trial and check out that course and many others at www.thegreatcoursesplus.com/featurehistory. Or click the link in the description below. Additionally, if you'd like, start a plan with them, starting as low as $14.99 a month. Now, on with the show. On Christmas Eve 1979, a combined air and land invasion of Afghanistan commenced. The Red Army quickly seized many urban areas, roads, and communication lines. Amin himself was captured and executed to be replaced by the more moderate Baba Kamal.
That's just what happens.
Disputes swiftly erupted internationally on whether this was an intervention or an invasion. The West and many Muslim countries decided on the latter. The tribal warlords had been repulsed to the mountains by
Amazing how so many things are just perspective. Let's go back to that.
Erupted internationally on whether this was an intervention or an invasion.
Intervention or is it invasion? Depends on perspective. Perspective's everything, isn't it?
The West and many Muslim countries decided on the latter. The tribal warlords had been repulsed to the mountains by the invasion, but this would only spell a new stage in their struggle. The foreign atheist/orthodox invader gave credence to this being a jihad, or holy war, and the warlords were soon
This is very important to see it because you're seeing as it's something more than just some political push. To them, it is a threat on their religion, they feel like, right? Their whole way of life. It is crossing into that realm, which is going to be very important for them. Jihad, holy war. This is becoming something much, much deeper.
united as the Mujahideen, committed to combating the...
I'm going to go back to these people. You need to know who the Mujahideen are. You really do need to know. I feel like I'm your teacher right now.
Or holy war.
Taking notes?
And the warlords were soon united as the Mujahideen, committed to combating the Soviets. The US had had their eyes on things for some time, and now saw a lovely opportunity to sow shit in the Soviets' backyard. They began funneling equipment through Pakistan to the Mujahideen. The US wanted to contain communism, of course.
Because the Mujahideen are these freedom fighters. Probably they would call themselves that, but they're fighting in kind of this idea of jihad. They're fighting for their religion. They're fighting for encroachment against imperialism. And it's not like America cares about those points of view from them. It's they're fighting an enemy that the Americans are at war with, right? And the enemy of your enemy is your friend. So ignore all the other stuff, and there you go. This is also, we'll see if they talk about in this the connection that the Mujahideen are going to have having forward, because there are a lot of modern connections. Maybe I can sneak some of those in if they don't cover it at the end.
The Mujahideen wanted Afghanistan independent and Islamic, and Pakistan didn't mind some pan-Islamic cooperation. Really,
not a secular nation.
Oh, except the Soviets, of course. That wasn't it though, as the Mujahideen's call for jihad had also seen many independent fighters and financiers come from abroad to join.
This is big.
One such notable figure was Osama bin Laden.
Great, God, they picked this up. So it became, this fight against the Soviet Union became an Islamic rallying cry across the entire Middle East. And people were coming from all over, Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Iran, all these people. And they're also going to become extremified out of this, especially after the war. They're becoming radicalized. Maybe that's a better word. Radicalized, a lot of them. And you see some of these people like Osama bin Laden who come in and they unify and they're making connections and basically take a lot of those strategies. And they're going to talk about, too, all that stuff the Americans gave them and then bring that back into to form their own organizations. Osama bin Laden, of course, is going to helping a leading person in Al-Qaeda, and you know about the future of the United States with Al-Qaeda and the 9/11 stuff. So you can see a lot of these connections.
You might have heard of him.
Go back. I'm going to let them fully explain the whole foreigners coming in and helping them.
That wasn't it though, as the Mujahideen's call for jihad had also seen many independent fighters and financiers come from abroad to join. One such notable figure was Osama bin Laden. You might have heard of him. In the end, despite all the support, the Soviets still held a clear upper hand. Under the guidance of Ahmad Shah Massoud, the Mujahideen indulged in guerrilla warfare, initiating a repeated and grueling effort for the Soviets to drive away the fighters, only for them to boomerang right back. It seemed as if for every fighter they killed, his death aided in the recruitment of 5 more, eager to become a martyr.
And what this is also doing is putting fence sitters, probably in Afghanistan, towards the Mujahideen side. Right? They're going to put a lot of them because they're seeing maybe they didn't like them originally, and some of the stuff they were calling for with this far more religious state that they want. But they see their point because they feel like there's this imperial encroachment by like the Soviet Union. So it's putting a lot of fence sitters onto the jihad side.
The Red Army's constant successful search and destroy missions were also in vain, as no matter how many battles they won, they continued to lose the war. It wasn't until 1985 this routine had finally worn on the patience of Soviet politics and people.
This is the biggest thing of war, right? This war's now gone on multiple years. What, 5 years already? And once you get to that length of war, you're going to run out of resources. And maybe the most important thing is you're probably going to run out of public support. And that's going to be very hard to keep up for anybody in any war. It's nearly impossible to win a war without really your home nation being fully behind it, or at least fully capable of doing it. And they haven't really said necessarily what do the Soviet people think of this, but it's just natural. The longer something goes, the more tired people become, and the less motivated they are.
The illusion of the grand communist power beginning to disintegrate before them. Mikhail Gorbachev took over as General Secretary the same year, his unique foreign policy and anti-war sentiment rapidly shifting opinion in the Union. The next year, the war effort was
such an
only
important
further
part of
degraded as Stinger missiles began to be supplied to the Mujahideen, accurately downing Soviet helicopters and crippling the army's ability to scale the high mountains. An exit strategy would be put in place. It switched out Kemal for Mohammad Najibullah and saw new attempts to transfer the burden of fighting on the Afghan army itself. This would be ramped up further in 1988 when Gorbachev officially signed off on the Geneva Accords, an agreement that would see the USSR begin withdrawal and no further intervention from any power.
I mean, this war was, 10 years? That's so long.
This concluded in 1989 when the last of the Red Army left Afghanistan, ending the Soviet-Afghan War, but not the war. The Mujahideen continued to resist Najibullah's government well past the withdrawal. For the Soviet Union, it continued to aid that government until in 1991 the Union itself unraveled, with fault to the prior involvement and Gorbachev's reforms. Najibullah disbanded the government when in 1992 the warlords of the Mujahideen had finally surrounded the capital, Kabul. At the gates of victory they sought to reach an agreement of how things would move forward. All agreed at Massoud's proposal that they rule in an Islamic coalition government, except for one, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who sought sole rule. And so war continued for several years between Massoud's alliance and Hekmatyar's Pakistani-backed army. It seemed that in 1994 Massoud had bested Hekmatyar, until a man by the name of Mohammed Mullah Ahmad rallied his followers to further the fight against Massoud. They called themselves the Taliban. Pakistan's
part of them now is a
very
powerful group today, a governing body.
To this new group, and in 1996 the Taliban had seized control of much of the country. And
you can see how it seems like the population, in a way, more people are like these type of groups are becoming more powerful as a result of the encroachment of the Soviet Union. Would it have become this radicalized in a way? Maybe I'm overstating those terms. If the Soviet Union had not had this pressure, all right, it's very likely not. It might have been on a more semi-secular sort of path. But again, these type of things, when you have a foreign threat, it tends to unify people more in a nation, and will take these kind of actions.
And took Kabul, brutally executing the former president Najibullah and declaring themselves as an Islamic emirate. Massoud, however, ignored their taunts and was unwavering in his resistance, continuing to fight from the north of the country with what few of his allies remained. It unfortunately ended when on September 9, 2001, Massoud was assassinated by Taliban members who had claimed themselves to be reporters. The alliance, without the leadership of their national hero, was surely doomed. Though, as I'm sure all viewers are swift to notice, merely 2 days later, the terrorist cell Al-Qaeda attacked the World Trade Center in New York. Their leader, Osama bin Laden, was offered shelter in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. The attacks provoked US President George W. Bush to declare a war on terror, and demanded the Taliban surrender bin Laden. They refused. The US had covertly aided the Mujahideen against Soviets, and with the Soviets gone,
This is where it's getting so interestingly connected, especially to the United States, who helped support a group in a way where a lot of those people that they supported back in the 80s will come to form other groups later that actually end up fighting the United States, like Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, right? Who are part of this fight, and their group supported by the Americans because they're fighting somebody the Americans didn't like. And then years later, having that come back against them.
the Mujahideen had splintered into many spiritual successors, such as the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. The irony of this was not lost on many. That, however, did not change the fact that in 2001, the US declared war on the Taliban. Decades of war, political instability.
I really hope you're seeing the connection, because you actually will be very surprised how many people, especially in America, do not know this story at all and they don't understand the connection. They're totally ignorant to it.
And virtual anarchy are not going to be ignorable for any country. Millions of Afghans died, and even more millions still live as refugees, and an unfortunate burden on the countries that have held them for so long. The roots and motives for many Islamic terrorist groups can be traced back to the Soviet-Afghan War. It was where their leaders met, their men were armed, and their resolve hardened. The fact that most people have forgotten or neglect this war but still live so heavily under its effects is rather disappointing. That does not stop me from trying though, nor you from further delving in, uncovering and surprising yourself with so many hidden motives behind and repercussions from this war. If I had a joke to finish on, that'd be great, but instead, in Soviet Russia...
He didn't end it. He did finish it.
Patrons. And unlike always, I'd like to thank my sponsor, The Great Courses Plus, for
or was edited, I don't know.
the episode. I really do encourage you to go to the description and click the link, for if no other reason than I get helps the channel out. Personal mentions to David Kendall, Thrace Vega, Zedfer, Steve Graham, Grandpa Hex, and, of course, Anal Scrubs. And for you, well, you get nothing. Your freeloading views are so much filth to me.
Alright. Okay. Good stuff. I thought this was awesome. This was awesome. I wanted to jump in at some point just to appreciate. I love the animations in here and the graphic art. I think it's really, really cool. This is awesome. I really, really enjoyed this. And I'm so glad he made the other connections, the modern connections there. It saves a lot of time for me and just gets you all in one place there of how actually important this war is to understanding the conflicts that exist between the West and a lot of the Middle East today, the whole regions, and you can see how they're all connected. Hopefully you learned a lot of something very new or something new there. And it's something I know I try to connect. And one of the challenges that world history teachers always have, and I did earlier in my career, but now it's not as much of an issue, which is getting to some of this more modern stuff. So that you can make those connections. It can be hard to do that as a world history teacher. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you, never got to the 70s or 80s in your general world history classes. I would probably say most of you, at least in like high school and stuff like that. And this is why I've in the last few years made it a much stronger effort of trying to get through and not get bogged down in a lot of the ancient stuff, which is amazing, but make sure you pace everything nicely so you can get through to the modern stuff. And it's usually fun to talk about because kids can start making connections with that. Anyway, amazing. I thought this was awesome video. I don't know what much better they could have done in a shorter form, visually pleasing type of video than they did without it being watered down too much and stuff like that. So I thought this was good. This is way better than I thought it would be too. I was very, very impressed. So absolutely make sure you go down below and watch the video. Run the video. There's the link down below to the original video will be there. Go ahead and support that channel. If you are going to do a Patreon pledge of something, I'd rather have you do it to these content creators than myself. But of course I appreciate it too. But awesome. Okay. With that, on the way out here, you can join our community. A few ways to do that. Make sure you're subbed over to the channel here and enable those notifications so you know when videos come out, when our live streams are, and that sort of thing. Join our Discord community. Got good over 6,000 people. Love to talk history down there. And other ways you can support the channel, Patreon. We have an awesome Teespring campaign going on right now. You should see links to that down below and all those sorts of things. All right. Thanks again so much. I hope you learned a lot. I know I did, and we'll see you next time. Bye.